Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the first week of xEssentials. It's a new video series that we're doing to cover a variety of different lighting topics to really get in there and help you with your setup, with your light show, and to help you be more successful. And we are going to get started. My name is Russell McFarland. This is my third year doing pixels, and I live in Columbia, South Carolina, and do a pixel display here. And what we want to talk about tonight is just planning your display. My first year, I ran out and kind of saw Matt Johnson's video and was really inspired. And he had that whole series following that after he went viral, saying, "Hey, here's how I did these things. Here's what I used." And I said, "Man, I could do this. I like this guy." And so I ran out to a pre-sale and started buying up pixels. And I didn't know what I was doing. And found myself, kind of caught in that mentality. I was thinking, if I don't buy this stuff now, I'm never going to be able to afford it. And I was just throwing things up until that very last minute of the pre-sale, throwing things in the cart, and spent a significant amount of money. And waited a few months, it all came in. And then I started researching, and then I started looking at my house. And it turned out that a lot of things I bought, still to this day, I don't use. And, it was completely overwhelming. And so now, 3 years later, kind of saying, if I was a newbie today, what would I want to know? How would I do it correctly? Now that you've kind of got it figured out, and what can we do to help people plan their shows and be successful without spending a bunch of money? Or, you're still going to spend a bunch of money, but spend it in a direction that that's beneficial for you later. So a few things, we're going to talk about the steps, the correct order, how you should go. So the first stage is going to be information gathering. Then we're going to go to planning, some things about vendor selection. That's a question we see on the forums a lot. Hey, who should I buy from? What should I buy? I heard about this guy. I heard about that guy. Kind of what are the pros and cons of the US-based resellers versus the Chinese-based vendors? Talk about that a little bit. And one thing we're not going to get caught up in tonight is a bunch of, okay, go to this vendor, go to XYZ. Try to stay pretty generic and kind of just, share with you what, what's out there and what are the pros and cons. Then the ordering process, generic cost budgeting items, and the community, how to get involved with that to continue your learning. So the first thing you should do is, and if I had to do it over again, is go gather information, learn what you like. So go look at a lot of videos, go look at a lot of pictures, really, and look for elements that stand out to you. And why I put this on there is this is a guy named Scott Bunker out in Colorado. And once again, this was back in 2015, 2016, when you didn't have a bunch of really dense mega trees. These were coming on scene, but I love these big, dense trees. I loved his symmetry. I loved those clean lines. And I said, man, that really sticks out to me personally, that's a house I really like, and I want to do something like that. And so I started looking and saying, hey, these are really cool. That speaks to me. What kind of pops out at you? So go through and start doing things like that. This is the Matt Johnson house, right? So once again, I really loved this because it was the clean lines. It was the arches. I knew immediately, hey, I love the way those things dance to the music. That fits my style. That's cool to me. I really want arches. So just kind of go through and look at things and see, what do you like? What don't you like? And that sounds kind of obvious, but once again, your tendency is to go out and start, buying a bunch of stuff and, charging through and doing that. But what you need to look at is say, hey, in this display, I really like X, Y, and Z, and I don't like things, that about that display. And so you keep a kind of a catalog going, and that's what I did. After I learned the hard way, I kept like a rolling folder with images in it and links to shows and people. And I, said, man, this is my style. This is what I like. I want to grab an element from this, an element from that, and this speaks to me. Pay attention to the details. People usually put down, hey, this mega tree was at 2-inch spacing or 3-inch spacing, or, this matrix is spaced at X, Y, and Z. Pay attention to those things because that's going to help you as you plan your show to kind of say, I like that traditional look maybe, with a wider spacing on an outline of 6 inches, 8 inches, whatever. Or I like the really tight 2-inch spacing where I can do more of a modern look. So start looking at those things and noticing those things. When it comes to prop vendors, there's a lot of things out there of spinners. Where did that come from? Snowflakes, where did that come from? What style is this and that? And when in doubt, people are really kind. Ask them, say, hey man, I really love your mega tree. How many strands was that? And that Scott Bunker guy I was talking about, I reached out to him and didn't know him from Adam's House Cat. And he shared a lot of information with me about exactly how they made it, exactly what they did. And that was really helpful to me as I started building things out. So this is kind of like the non-fun part, and this is my house. And after I started sitting down, I started measuring things in detail, and that's going to really aid your planning. So know exactly what you're working with. Before you order and before you start diving into this stuff, go in there and look at all the architectural features of your house, your eaves, these arches, the windows, whatever. Know those details, know those distances, and really go out there and come up with a good plan, because you're going to want to know, hey, I've got 186 feet of linear feet of eaves, and I know these things now, and I've got that documented, and I know what I need to order, and of course order extra, but you can go out there and instead of just making assumptions about, I think my house is this long or that long, I think that looks about like 10 feet off the air, in the air, you don't know those things until you go out and measure. And so what I did is broke my house up into chunks and measured all these different architectural details, windows and doors. This is kind of like my height. And then I went in there and even documented things as I planned. Sorry. See, I can access the soffit through the attic. So I was looking, saying, how am I going to get data out from the house network out to my controllers here? Where am I going to run wires so I don't have to go out there and do a bunch of stuff over the sidewalk? Where can I centralize my controllers? So look at those details and really analyze and think about these things. Where do I have power? Is there an outlet way over here? Or is there an outlet way over here? Where can I grab power from? Look at all those details and analyze it, because it's all going to make a difference. As well as, don't just sit there in your yard. Go out to the street where the viewers are and start looking at those things from where a car is going to be sitting, watching your show, and measure these things, because you're going to want to know, what's my distance from the viewer, from the car, to here, because that's going to make things change as far as your spacing goes, as far as what kind of props looks best on your house, and really look at those things through the eye of a viewer. That's what we're saying up here, is kind of look at those angles, look at those distances, what's going to look good from afar, and what can you safely get to. I had gone out there and measured all of my peaks on my roof, and just due to the architecture of the house, I can get a lift in here and I can safely access these eaves, on the face. There's no way I can safely access these peaks up here and these ridges. And so although I'd measured them out and said, man, I'm buying pixels for those things, that's just not feasible. It's just not, something that's easy to do, safe to do, and due to the pitch of the roof, it's just not going to happen for me. So that's something to consider, is what's realistic, and what can you do safely and effort-wise. So what I would say is, look at all those things and go out there and say, those elements really spoke to me, and be realistic about it. So those arches, I know I gotta have arches. I know I want a tree. And you know what? Maybe that's a great starting point for the year. I can promise you, by the time you build a mega tree and invest in all the things that goes into that, as well as building some other elements out, that might be a lot for your first year, and that's a good thing. And that's not to say people don't come out of the gate with a 10,000 pixel show. That does happen, but a lot more people get frustrated by taking on too much and just give up. And so it's better to take on small chunks and build off of those chunks than in your second and third year, than to try to just take on too much financially, or from an effort standpoint, a knowledge standpoint. So look at those elements that really speak to you and build those first, and then you can grow from there. So once you have all that data, go out there and say, hey, what can I do? Where do those come from? Have attainable goals and pick your favorite things out and try to go for those first. And then another mistake I made is research those props. Go to those prop vendors and say, what kind of node do I need, or what node best suits that prop. So you can see this is one of my 36-inch Boscoio snowflakes. It's one of the Living Light Show snowflakes. And it is only meant for bullets. As you can see, this is double layered Coro. And if you add square nodes, because you bought it because some guy on a forum said, squares are better than bullets, that's not going to work for that prop, and you're going to be rebuying. And so I would encourage you to research your props ahead of time and consider what type of pixel you need for that prop. And here's a Boscoio flake that I've got. This isn't my picture, it's somebody else's picture, but they're designed for square nodes. And as you can see, they got these recesses in them, and they fit up in there nicely to go against a wall. And it's really meant for square nodes. So consider all these things, look that up, research it before you buy, because it does make a difference, and it is going to make you more successful if you consider those details up front. I see it every year. People say, hey, I can't get my pixel in this or that. It's because it's really not the right design for that prop. The pixel's not designed correctly for that prop. So be cognizant of that. That information's out there. And once again, people are happy to answer those questions if you ask. But you have to have those details and that knowledge to ask up front. So let the vendors do what they're good at. Another mistake I made is I went out there, didn't do a lot of research, got a bunch of pixels with no ends, and had to order pigtails. And I sit there for 3 weeks soldering up pigtails and all that. Nowadays, it's a lot more commonplace that you can get waterproof plugs pre-installed. Leverage that, go for that, let them do that, because not only do you end up with a huge labor savings, you also end up with a solid string of pixels or a solid extension cable or whatever that's factory sealed. It's made up as one piece, and it's going to be more reliable. And I tell you, people say, oh, I'm going to save my money by buying a big box of Cat 5, and I'm going to get some pigtails and I'm going to make them myself. You might save a marginal amount of money if you don't account for your time, but if you consider the cost of those pigtails, the cost of the wire, the cost of the solder sleeves, the cost of the heat shrink, and just sitting there suffering through all that stuff, it's not worth it. They're not that much more. I get the factory pre-made extension cables, and it makes life so much easier. I've got a bin of 5-footers, 10-footers, and 25-footers, and when I set up, I can go out there and grab from those bins, and I'm done. And it's a good feeling, and I've got solid connections all the way through. As well as if you do planning, you can go out there and order pixels with longer leads. For instance, when we're talking about a mega tree, a lot of pixels strings are being offered now with 6-foot leads on that. So you don't have to go out there and buy more extension cables and have another joint in the line. You can go out there and say, I know I need 32 strands for a mega tree, so I'm going to order 35 for extra. And then I'm going to have those pre-installed and pre-made onto the cable, because I know forecasted that I need those pixels for that prop. Prop vendors have made life a lot easier. I often look at these guys that did this stuff even 5 years ago, and they're out there with jigs and drilling PVC pipe and having to custom make all these things. Nowadays, you can go out there for like $1.50, $2 and buy an 8-foot strip of pre-punched pixel strip, and that you can go in there and do all your spacing and then zip tie that to PVC pipe or EMT or whatever. Man, that makes life so much easier and makes you a lot more efficient. You end up with a better result. So let them do that. Plan well so that you can go out there and really organize things. And I've got some pictures and examples of that later, so that you don't have to have a bunch of manual intervention. By that, I mean cutting the cable and soldering and adding jumper wire and adding pixels and all that. If you do your planning well, you can get the vendor to do that for little to no cost. And by that, it's going to save you a lot of time, effort, money, and you'll have a more reliable show. We had some questions earlier about kits and packages. Do I want to buy a tree kit, or do I want to buy a bundled up controller with an enclosure? None of those are bad, but there's not a lot of value in kits. Usually you're buying just those same components at a higher price. I say really the controller build out, something that a lot of people get excited over. It's your first thing you're kind of doing. You're putting this board in a box and putting in pigtails and all that. And I would say that's a good time to really learn, because you're going to have to fabricate stuff and start putting things together at some point. If you do a light show, you're going to have to do those things. So you're going to have a level of comfort to go in there and start building stuff. So, there's nothing wrong with a pre-built, ready to go controller or whatever you want to do, or tree, but at some point in time, you're going to have to go in there and interact with those things. And so you might as well jump in and develop that level of comfort and start working on this stuff. I put in there, there's nothing that's truly ready to run. I get why that term is used, and that's fine. But you're always going to have things that's going to take setup and programming, and you're going to have to do those things to be successful. So, just be cognizant of that, and you're going to have to fabricate at some point in time. So one thing I started to go down, but fortunately we're going to have dedicated sessions on this later, is things like pixel voltage. Do I buy 5 volt? Do I buy 12 volt? Or controller technologies. Do I want a centralized controller, or do I want to do this distributed model where I have different receiver boards and things, or pixel sticks different places? And we're going to do that in other sessions where we can spend a lot more time. There's also a ton of information out there on the forums, on our Facebook page, that you can read about. It's really a personal preference thing, and it depends on how everything's laid out and spaced out. There's people that are successful in every different direction. It's just a matter of what works for you and what works at your house. So vendor selection, this is an important thing. We're fortunate, once again, that there are a lot of trusted vendors that have been around for a long time, and that they do a really good job and have served the hobby well. And so there's a lot of directions you can go, and there's a lot of good ones. And I've bought from most all of them different things. I think different vendors really excel at different things. It depends on, if you want somebody who's got great service, or somebody who's got a lot of inventory, or somebody who customizes, or somebody who offers, different types of boards as far as, power distribution boards, or, different things like that. Different vendors do different things well. I thought this was a really good poll that Sean did late last year, and it said, hey, who do you go out there and buy from? And just kind of getting a general consensus. And you can read through these. All of these are, are good vendors. I would caution some of the generic ones like Amazon and AliExpress. While, we all buy things from there, and I voted for Amazon because I, buy a lot of stuff from Amazon, but I wouldn't buy just raw pixels from Amazon or AliExpress just because you don't know what you're getting. There's not a lot of consistency there. But anyway, these are all great vendors in the hobby, and, you can go through and see, because people post their experiences. You'll see it all the time. Hey, thank you X, Y, and Z for this order. And people are pretty transparent about their experiences with folks. So go out there, read, see who is the best vendor for you. And we'll talk about some of the pluses and minuses of the US guys versus the Chinese-based resellers. And we'll talk about those things. But one thing to know, and I didn't know this very well either going into it, is the pigtails are not compatible across vendors. So if you're going to go buy pixels from Ray Wu, they're not going to be compatible with Paul Zhang or Holiday Koro or whatever. That's a thing to note. So once you start with a vendor, it's kind of important to go out there and say, I'm going to have a relationship with these people, and you're getting a little bit committed. Not really. I mean, you can always cut the ends off or have mixed matched ends for different props and controllers, but that's kind of frustrating. And so it's important to start out with a good vendor. Look at their reputation, and once again, that's something that's very well noted across the forums. Longevity, and what I mean by that is that vendor going to be around in 5 years? So if I build out this show and I've got a whole hundreds of pigtails and 50 strings of lights, do I have the confidence they're going to be there in another 5 years, so I can keep buying those things from them? Look at their warranty history and their service history. And people are very straightforward about that stuff. What happens if you do have a problem? Are they going to stand behind it? So look at those things. So let's talk about the advantages of the US-based vendors. First of all, I think their stores are a lot easier to shop. They've got clear descriptions. They've got clear pricing. You can email them for a shipping quote, or some of them have shipping built into their pricing calculators. So they're very easy to shop. They have a very clear product line, and you can go out there and easily identify things that you need. and order. Some people are more comfortable with a US-based reseller. And so, there's a comfort dealing with somebody that's based in, here in the United States, and they like dealing with that. And that's understandable. Although it's not universal, and I don't want to sit there and lump everybody together and commit them to things, but some of these resellers are pretty good about answering basic technical questions. Hey, I got this green wire and this blue wire and this brown wire. Where does this go again? Or, this thing's flashing or turning pink. What's going on there? And a lot of these guys will answer basic questions like that. I mean, they're not going to build your display for you or sequence your entire show for free. But, some of them will help you through those details. And if not, we're here to help as a community. Another big advantage is they maintain stock throughout the season on basic items. So if you need 4 more pigtails in November, you can go out there and order 4 more pigtails and probably get it in a few days. And that's helpful. And because they're based here in the United States, they can send you 4 pigtails for $10 versus $25 or more trying to ship it from China. So those are some of the advantages. Disadvantage, and we want to put a little pre-sales caution out there because of my experience and a lot of experiences that we've heard over and over. Pre-sales aren't bad. They're not bad things. You can save money from US-based resellers that way. But if you don't really understand what you're doing and you don't really understand what you're buying and what you need to buy, don't feel pressured into going out there and buying a bunch of stuff and figuring it out later, because that's what I did. And it cost me double of what it would have cost, later in the year if I'd have just waited and bought things that I knew I needed based off of my planning. I would have saved a lot more money. Although the pixels were more expensive later in the year, I wouldn't have been stuck with a bunch of unnecessary stuff. So if you don't feel that pressure, if you don't understand it, don't go out there and buy a bunch of stuff. Just chill out, and they'll have stuff later in the season. It's okay. And there's other places to buy it, and that's okay. But don't feel that pressure. And also note, and once again, I don't think the vendors are unclear about this. They're very clear. But with a pre-sale, you're going to go out there and buy $1,000 worth of pixels, and you're going to PayPal that vendor or give that vendor your credit card, and they're going to charge you right then for $1,000. And you're not going to see your products for several months on their schedule. And once again, that's not trickery. That's what they say. And what they're doing is gathering up everybody's money, passing that savings on, and bulk buying shipping containers from overseas. And then they get those products in and deliver them. But that takes time. And so every year I see people getting frustrated saying, dadgummit, I've spent $1,000 in January, and here it is March, and I still don't have my stuff. And that causes frustration. So just be aware of that. Another disadvantage is these guys buy stock, buy in bulk, and so you have very limited customization of pixel strings. Like some will sell you stuff that's kind of pre-customized with long leads or whatever. And I've talked to a vendor that says, if you order 200 strings, then we'll be able to customize things for you, but you're pretty limited there. Higher pricing. So being that these guys are based in the US and they have to keep inventory and they have expenses and they have to make money, they are priced higher than when you're dealing with China. And it's not leaps and bounds higher, but it is higher. And that's something that people are sensitive to. So just like an advantage is that people want US-based resellers, other people are very sensitive to price and say, well, I can get these pixels from China for X, Y, and Z amount. And so it's a trade-off. Which one do you want? And depending on the vendor, once again, I can't kind of pile everybody together, but the warranty may not be as strong. Different vendors have different policies. Just research those policies before you order and kind of understand, what's the warranty, what are other people's experiences there, and just look into that before you order. It just depends on the time and the vendor and what their warranty is. So we talked about Chinese vendors. What are the advantages? They will go out there and customize about anything. This was a shocker to me for little to no cost. And I still don't know to this day how they can make money doing it. But if you go out there and ask for custom spacing or custom jumper wire or whatever, they'll typically do that for little to nothing. So I put in this example. I'm trying to zoom in. I'm using my wife's computer, so I don't have a lot of zoom. But anyway, here's a Bosco tree I've got. And I ordered a string, and I found the way I was stringing it that I was going to need to add about 18 inches of wire here to make it up to the star. And so what I had the vendor do is to go in there in between pixel 80, this is a string of 100, So in between pixel 80 and 81, go in there and add me 18 inches of wire. And they did that for 10 strings and charged me 50 cents extra per string, which I was gladly to pay that extra $5, not have to cut 10 strings apart, add jumper wire, heat shrink it all back together. And as you can see, it's a nice factory, single piece. And so, it's made that way. Also, I had pigtails pre-attached, so I don't have to fight that later. So it's nice but I wouldn't have known that. And I didn't know that when I first bought all this stuff, because I didn't plan well. But if you do plan well, you can look at those things now and order your pixels that way, and you're going to be better off. So another advantage is, they're going to be cheaper on bulk orders. So if you go out there and say, even with pre-sale pricing, if you go out there and order 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 pixels, whatever, it'll be a lot cheaper. You can't order a single strand from them. It's just too expensive. As a matter of fact, I just ordered a single strand and a single pigtail from a vendor just to test with, and I paid $25 in shipping for a half-pound package just this week. So anyway, it's $25 to ship a pigtail and 50 lights. So you don't want to do that. An advantage is a lot of these guys, you see their names around, they're trusted partners. They've been around for a long time. They've got excellent warranty service, and they stand behind their stuff really well. I think they know that their reputation's at stake with every order and every customer, as with each, vendors in the U.S. too. And they offer excellent service. So there's no problems there getting them to stand behind their products. They do have a lot more extensive product lines. You go to some of these guys and look at their AliExpress store, and they have thousands of items, and that's intimidating as a newbie. But if you did want some, lights for, some guys were putting arcade lights or these carnival ride lights, pixels inside of those really big light bulbs, and testing those to say, hey, what if I have a really big fat pixel in here? How's that going to look? And you can buy those things from the Chinese vendors, whereas they're not as available because they're kind of one-offs from the US-based guys. And they can be flexible. And like I said, that's where I was coming from with a lot of these customizations. And they'll be very flexible with you and deliver what you need. If you want green wire, red wire, multicolor wire, long wire, short wire, whatever, they're going to do that for you. Some of the disadvantages are their storefronts are really confusing. And once again, it's hard to navigate through all those things and kind of figure out exactly what you need. Some guys that are great trusted partners don't even have a storefront. You've got to message them and say, hey, I want, this many pixels and this configuration, and they'll do that, but you don't have that kind of window shopping experience that you could have with a US-based store. Small orders are expensive. It's just the nature of it. And that's a problem if you just need a few things here and there. So it's really better to kind of queue everything up and order in one big order. Communication can be delayed. All these guys speak English. I mean, they're not hard to communicate with, but you've got to kind of wade through that and wait on, they reply at 3 o'clock in the morning and you're trying to ask questions and go back and forth. So that can be delayed. It's not bad, but it's just delayed. Shipping costs can be unclear. You see that a lot on the, on the group and on the forums saying, hey, I went out there and looked at this guy's site and it's super expensive to ship all this stuff and I thought it was going to be a good deal. You always have to ask everybody for a custom quote and they'll work with you. They'll deal with you and those numbers will become a lot more favorable. So ask for a custom quote, but just window shopping is going to be unclear. And, like everybody else, if you wait to the fall, they're going to be backed up. They're going to be backed up for 4 weeks or whatever. If you need a bunch of custom strings, that's not going to happen. As well as they have different holidays than we do. I think sometime in January, February, I should have looked it up. They shut down for Chinese New Year for a while. And so if you're trying to interact with them during those times, they could be off the radar. So it's pretty rare. And once again, it's understandable if you wait till the peak season and then ask for a bunch of stuff immediately. That may not happen. So that's a disadvantage. We get a lot of questions saying, how much is this going to cost me? I can get pixels for 28 cents a piece on a pre-sale and, what's this going to cost me? So I've been talking to a lot of people and kind of looking at my own stuff, talking to folks. I actually put a survey out there recently and was pretty encouraged, I guess, to see people's honesty and transparency. You can pretty much count on $1 a pixel for a fully completed show. That includes the pixel cost, the controller cost, the prop cost, you know, screws, tape, solder sleeves, soldering irons, whatever. But when you have a 3,000 pixel show, you're probably going to be spending close to $3,000. And you're going to have people say, and once again, this is all based off of raw, just guesses and assumptions. I mean, people say, well, I can save money this way and that way. And you can. There's no absolutes. But if you really, and frankly, the guys who kept very detailed records, who I'm not one of those people, but they were a lot higher than $1 a pixel when they considered all of their costs. You know, they were higher than $1 a pixel. So anyway, that's not an absolute, but that is something that you need to talk about when you say, I want this display and I know I want a 3200 pixel Megatree. You know what? By the time you buy a pole and a strip and you know, power supply and everything else, you're going to be pushing $1 a pixel. And you know, that scales differently. But anyway, it's just something to kind of consider. So we talk about those things. I just sat down and started making a list of all the things I had to buy my first year. And this isn't even all inclusive, but controllers, enclosures, props, you know, getting all the Coro in, pigtails, extension wires, data cables. I had to run Cat 6 everywhere. Power distribution boards I put in every single controller I put out there. I've got a power distribution board for injection, supply wire from the power supply to the you know, to the controller, and fuses that are in line there. I've got to have 120 volt pigtails coming out to power those things, the power of the power supplies, heat shrink, mounting hardware. If you buy mounting panels for your controllers, or clips to put up under your eaves, anything to mount anything with. Raspberry Pi if you use FPP to run your xSchedule on. And then, oh man, I bought, you know, Raspberry Pi, so now I've got to buy an SD card, and they said on the forums I got to buy a nice SD card, so that's a cost. Extension cords to run everywhere, a pipe for your outlines, a Megatree topper, you know, that was 60, 70, 80 bucks for me. ASAP pole hardware, and that can be, you know, hundreds of dollars once you start looking at all the costs there. I mean, I was buying a boat winch for my Christmas tree, and it's something I'd never thought I'd be doing. But you know, that was not a cost I considered. Specialty tools, what I mean there is, you know, if you have little ferrule crimpers, or if you have a new digital soldering iron like I bought, different things there. You know, solder sleeves, if you want to buy sequences, that's a cost. You don't have to do that, but you know, that's a cost that people don't think about just looking at pixels and pre-sales. You got to buy music. That's not a large cost, but it's something to consider. Network switch to make all this stuff talk. That's another, you know, 50 bucks. And 30 trips to Lowe's, and I've probably done more than that. All the little things you don't think about, specialty screws and cup hooks and wire ties and, you know, different things. You would be surprised how many trips you take to Lowe's, Home Depot, or whatever. And of course, your xLights donation to the dev team. So that's always important every year. So that's kind of walking through, and the biggest thing you got to do is get involved. And I think the people who are listening live are definitely involved. They're here on the Zoom call. They're part of the Facebook group. Do that. You will learn more from these people. And there are so many brilliant people in these hobbies, and so many kind people in this hobby that will really get in there and help, and love to share. We've all been where newbies are now and know that feeling. And you know, there's always people willing to help. So feel free to ask. Please do. And you know, it's always helpful if you search first and kind of learn on your own. But then always feel free to ask questions. Also, there's a lot of local lighting groups around, especially if you're in bigger cities. Man, I was listening to the Florida guys talk recently, and they've got like a star-studded mini coming up, really well organized, a lot of great education, and done a great job. And so hopefully there's one in your area. If there's not, if you're in a small town like me, and I'm like the only pixel guy here, see if there's somebody else that'll mentor you, and somebody that's around, and say, hey, can I come over for a Saturday and, you know, look at some of this stuff and how it works. I had one of the big lure guys here in town knock on my door just this past season saying, hey, I like pixels. They're really cool. I want to see what you got. And now he's been by twice. We talk a lot, and it's something he's going to get into next year. So while we don't have a formal group, I'm glad to help mentor him. And he's local, so I can go and show him, hey, here's the controller, here's the pixels, here's how I set everything up, here's xLights. And that's really helpful. So if you've got somebody local, that can be helpful. Resources, we were going to list out a whole bunch of resources, but Really, if you just go to xlights.org/resources, those things are there, and they're kept up to date. And that's one central place you can go to see, where's the link to the Google Drive, and that way I can find those free sequences and models. There's a link to a lot of the groups and forums. There's a link to the great Australian, the Lighting 101 done by the Australian group. That's a great manual and a great resource. There's a link to that. And there's a lot of things out there that you can consume and learn a ton by going there and kind of picking things up. Okay, everyone, that concludes our first session of xEssentials. If you're viewing this live, please stick around and ask your questions. If viewing this via recording, please join us every Wednesday night on the Zoom call starting at 7 p.m. Eastern, and we'll be glad to talk about whatever you got. The xLights project exists because of people like you. Help continue the project by making a donation today at xlights.org/donate.